There's clearly something wrong with Western comics and storytelling. It's been a problem for a while, but if you dared to bring it up, you'd be met with a wall of denial. Something has broken through, though. There's no denying it any longer, because recently, Jim Lee, the president of DC Comics, and one of the most influential artists in history, posed a question that perfectly captures the turmoil at the heart of the comic book industry. He said, "The stories told in Japanese manga and anime are incredibly powerful. I often find myself wondering, what is missing in Western comics? And why aren't they able to achieve the same flavor?" Now, this is a rare moment of public vulnerability from someone who's actively shaping the industry. There are many ingredients from anime and manga that contribute to the massive differences from Western comics. Sure, we could talk about the art style or the paper quality, but I think Jim Lee is talking about something specific. I think the flavor he's talking about, the flavor that's resonating with so many who are ditching Western comics for anime and manga, is sincerity. For decades, the American comic book industry assumed it owned the monopoly on cool. But as the MCU's Iron Man era fades into a sea of multiversal fatigue, and DC's struggling to find its feet with its latest reboot, manga and anime have moved from a niche subculture to the dominant global storytelling force. For years, the conversation has been framed as a clash of aesthetics. But the reality is a cultural shift in how we value stories. While Jim Lee wonders what's missing, the audience has already found it elsewhere. They found it in a medium that isn't afraid to let its characters truly hurt, to truly change, and most importantly, to truly end. By the way, there was a weird number of people asking after our last video if we were AI. We're not, we're real people.
It feels like there's a widening gap in how Western comics handle sincerity compared to anime and manga. In recent years, Western adaptations have fallen in love with Bathos. Bathos is the act of undercutting a moment of high tension or emotion with a joke to avoid the deep vulnerability and the discomfort that can evoke.
Because that's what heroes do.
Sometimes it feels like the West has become allergic to earnestness. People often refer to it as Marvel humor or millennial humor, but Bathos is nothing new. It just feels like it has a stranglehold on Western entertainment. Anime, conversely, leans into pathos. It isn't afraid to let the audience squirm in discomfort if it means being sincere. When a protagonist screams about the power of friendship or weeps over a fallen mentor, the story doesn't wink at the camera. This sincerity resonates with a generation that is tired of irony. It resonates with people looking to actually feel the weight of the moment. The difference between pathos and bathos is crucial in understanding the fundamental tonal difference between Western and Eastern creators. It's the biggest insight into the difference in how they treat their audience's emotions. In storytelling, pathos is the quality that evokes pity, sympathy, or deep sorrow. Bathos, however, is a sudden shift in the mood, from the sublime or serious to the ridiculous or mundane. It's often used as a safety valve to release tension.
Thor, son of Odin.
Sasha, son of a bitch, you're still alive.
Yeah, I think this stems from a fear of being truly vulnerable. In the modern Western landscape, particularly within the Marvel-fied cinematic style, there's a palpable fear of earnestness. This is where Bathos reigns supreme. Whenever a moment becomes too heavy, too romantic, or too heroic, a character will almost inevitably crack a joke to ground the scene. This humor acts as a wink to the audience, signaling, we know this guy's in a cape, don't take it too seriously. But this has a very real cost. While this makes movies fun, it prevents the audience from staying in a state of true vulnerability.
Well, what I'm trying to say is...
Peter, you know this is an open line, right?
What?
We're listening to everything you're saying.
And it is painful.
And you're just telling me now?
We were hoping it would stop on its own.
If the story won't take itself seriously, eventually the audience won't either. This has become the dominant flavor in Western comics and storytelling that Jim Lee is talking about. It's a flavor much of the audience has grown tired of. There is a power to leaning in. Manga and anime almost exclusively prioritize pathos. Because when a character in Demon Slayer or Naruto loses a loved one, the story allows the character to scream, to weep, and to be uncool. It's about ugly sincerity. Anime doesn't care about looking cool during a tragedy. It uses exaggerated visual language, such as heavy shadows, trembling line work, and cinematic silence. This forces the viewer to feel the weight of the moment. There certainly is aura farming, just not where it doesn't belong. Well, maybe sometimes. But it doesn't detract from the moments that should be sincere.
Yeah, I think this really does come down to earned versus unearned emotion. Because manga artists aren't trying to appeal to everyone. They aren't forced to create a 4-quadrant global blockbuster, so they can afford to be melodramatic. Paradoxically, that melodrama feels more real to a generation craving connection than the ironic detachment of Western heroes. It comes down to tension management. It's not that manga and anime don't have humor. Series like One Piece are famously absurd. The difference lies in where the humor is placed. In Western storytelling, the joke often appears during the climax or immediately after a death or another tragedy.
The damage is not too bad. As long as the foundations are still strong, we can rebuild this place. It will become a haven for all peoples and aliens of the universe. Now those foundations are gone. Sorry.
This is subtractive. It takes away from the stakes. In manga and anime, the humor is usually additive or strictly separated. You have chibi or gag moments for levity, but when the internal monologue starts and the stakes rise, the humor vanishes. The story trusts the audience to handle the intensity without needing a joke to break the fall.
I feel like another key difference in the flavor that Jim Lee's talking about comes down to stakes. Because Western superhero comics feel like they're engineered to never end. It's comforting, but nothing's rare. If the character dies, the audience doesn't mourn. They check their watches to see how many issues it'll take for the resurrection. This circularity creates a lack of consequence. Whereas manga operates on a different logic. It feels like a singular moment in time. Most manga are the vision of a single creator, with a definitive beginning, middle, and end. When a character dies in Attack on Titan or Cyberpunk Edgerunners, they are gone. The story is a straight line, not a circle. Western comic characters feel like an endless buffet, a procession of repeat visits and the assurance you can always come back for more. Manga and anime feel like a last meal. They often feel more special because it's over. I feel like the question has to be asked, has the Western reliance on irony and quippiness made it impossible to create new icons that people truly worship rather than just like?
But this brings us to the next and potentially bigger problem: how audiences are introduced to Western comics. Because the funnel to Western comics defines the tonal expectation for the actual comics. The primary way people find comics now is through the cinematic universe, but these movies are homogenized for mass market appeal. They're corporate products first, story second. They are, in general, the biggest offenders of trading pathos for bathos. Furthermore, these movies often spark debate over interpretation, with people saying things like, "Not my Superman," because these movies are interpretations of 80 years of conflicting canon. There can be a huge disconnect in the way the audience feels about a movie in the MCU or DCU and the way they feel when they actually buy a comic. When it comes to comic book movies, even if you nail the tone, there's still a minefield of canon and lore to navigate. A single wrong step is enough to have long-standing fans fight, and new fans decide it's not worth the effort.
How the do comic book writers keep up with their continuity? Let's define what comic book continuity is. Basically, every time you come out with an issue, you're laying another sort of stone on a pathway, right? And so you can't contradict something that has previously been written unless you give a reason for it.
Yeah, where anime is like a one-for-one funnel. If you watch Jujutsu Kaisen and love it, you can pick up the book and see the exact same story. There's no homework. No which run should I read, and no fighting about the correct version. It's a singular, cohesive vision. It really does raise the question as to which is better, the one-for-one adaptation or the interpretation that is almost always necessary when it comes to comic book films.
I think the audience's entry point into a comic will define their relationship with the characters and stories. Because anime is a direct funnel, when a manga is adapted to anime, it is usually a one-for-one translation. So if you love the show, you can buy volume 1 of the manga and find the exact same story. There's no infighting about which version is canon. Fan discussion feels less tedious, less pedantic, less combative. It creates a unified community where everyone is experiencing these same emotional beats simultaneously. Whereas, by contrast, Western adaptations are rarely adaptations. They're almost always interpretations. Because these films must appeal to a massive, non-comic reading audience, They often strip away the very flavor, the weirdness that made the original work special. This just creates a sort of ecosystem where fans are likely to say stuff like, "Not my Superman." It creates a space where fans don't uniformly rally around the story. They fight over which version of the character is correct. Which, like we said, isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it does make funneling the audience from the film adaptations to the comics far more difficult. Now, I think this is totally fine. I think fan debates are part of a healthy fandom, but if a studio is trying to please everyone, they usually please no one. Whereas with anime, a fan can see another fan of the anime and wholeheartedly endorse the manga. But with comic book movies, you simply don't have that direct guarantee of endorsement.
Now, we haven't addressed the elephant in the room, which Jim Lee also recognizes in his statement, the genre gap. Jim Lee said, "I think manga has an advantage over American comics, which are mostly about superheroes, and that's where the majority of sales and readers are concentrated." And Jim Lee is correct. DC and Marvel are, for all intents and purposes, superhero companies. While they have subgenres, they are locked into a specific power fantasy archetype. Manga is an entire industry. It covers high school romances, culinary competitions, horror, sports, and even slice of life dramas. It appeals to people who have zero interest in capes. By consolidating the Western comic identity into superheroes, the industry narrowed its own flavor profile to a single spice. And this is only made worse by the differences in how each industry perceives its characters. In the West, particularly at the big two, Marvel and DC, characters are no longer just protagonists. They are perpetual corporate assets. When you're writing a character that represents a multi-billion-dollar license, you're not writing a story, you're curating a brand. This leads to a fundamental lack of commitment to any narrative choice that might stick. If a writer wants to explore a permanent tragedy or a radical life change, they are often stopped by the invisible hand of the brand's long-term viability. They cannot take the risk of alienating a slice of the audience, or worse, losing a character they might need for a movie 3 years from now. Manga and anime, by contrast, are driven by the auteur's vision. A mangaka is often a single individual with a specific, finite story to tell. They aren't worrying about how their character will look on a lunchbox in 30 years. They're worrying about how that character's journey reflects the theme of the story today. The thing is, there's a cost to permanence. Because Western comics are built to never end, they're built to never matter in the way a final story does. When an anime character makes a choice, it's a commitment to that character's path. When a comic book hero makes a choice, the audience knows that a new writer will likely hit the reset button in 24 issues. So the comic book audience can always choose to not invest in this interpretation and instead wait for the next one. Jim Lee's missing ingredient isn't something that can be bought or branded. It's the ability to step away from the corporate safety net and allow a character to be truly consequential. It's the understanding that for a story to be complete, it has to have a true ending. Western comics have become almost indistinguishable from the sort of stories that are public domain. Stories like Sherlock Holmes or Frankenstein. Liking one version of these stories is no guarantee you'll like the others. Somewhere along the line, Western storytelling, especially the comic book industry and its adaptations, became afraid of true sincerity. It became afraid to let the audience sit in the silence of genuine loss or the weight of permanent pain. Additionally, because these properties are so heavily corporatized, risks have been replaced by brand preservation. There is a paralyzing fear of taking a chance that might remove a character that is needed for the next installment. They've built a landscape where no one can truly die because every hero is an asset on a balance sheet. Anime and manga don't concern themselves with these fears. They understand that for a character to feel real, they have to be vulnerable. There has to be real consequences. The missing flavor Jim Lee is sensing isn't a new reboot. It isn't a darker tone or a bigger cinematic universe. It's the courage to let our heroes grow, and when necessary, let them fail. But most importantly, to let them go.
Western comics are in the endless installment business. Manga and anime are in the timeless story business. What I think Jim Lee is recognizing is that something finite will always hold more value than something that never ends.